Hey, we're back with the Cyber World podcast. I'm Mark Hoyer, editor-in-chief. Kevin Cameron, our technical editor, is with me. The producer is not on this show, so he would be tearing out what hair he has left when I say our topic today is mixture preparation, fuel vapor, formation of mixture in the intake tract. My producer would say not a banger topic, not weirdly the TZ750, which is our most popular so far, or baggers. Man, that was a real crusher. Bagger racing, that worked out great. You guys love that, and it still continues to get views and listens. We appreciate it. We're gonna get down dirty and molecular again. It is our specialty. I don't know if Kevin's going to start with dinosaurs and decomposition and formations of carbons under pressure underground. Who knows? We can just sit here and say, welcome, Kevin. Where would you like to begin?
Well, the thing is that the internal combustion engine wouldn't be possible unless it could operate on a fuel that lit quickly and burned quickly to a high pressure. And fortunately, the very first internal combustion engines just past the middle of the 19th century burned city gas. City gas was made by roasting coal, and all this gas pours off and it burns. And so all those wonderful, dreamy scenes of the streetlights being lit in Paris in the 19th century, city gas. City gas mixes with air easily, and you can ignite it. And people were concerned about what we'd like to make this type of engine vehicular. We'd like it to go places. We don't want it to just sit there going pack, 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 pack on city gas, because how are you going to take the gas mains with you? You can't. So the wonderful thing comes along. Wilhelm Maybach, who is always depicted as an ancient person like myself, but at the time of his adventuresome work, he was a hot young dude like the best of them in Silicon Valley in its classic times. So he was sure that he was going places, and he did. But he came up with the idea of a spray carburetor, which took its fuel from a constant level of fuel in a float bowl, which is basically the same thing as the toilet tank with the float and the valve in it. It maintains a constant level. Early liquid-fueled engines had run on the following system. Intake air entered a box in which was a crumpled-up shirt soaked with gasoline, and it went from the box to the engine's intake port. And by adjusting the rate at which fuel dripped onto the shirt, you could get the mixture sort of right, and it would sit there and go pack, 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 just like a city gas engine. Except now you had a portable fuel, a liquid. Well, even with satisfactory means of mixing liquid fuel into rushing air, that is Maybach spray carburetor, there is the problem of mixture limits. And we've talked about this before. Mixtures that are leaner than 18 parts air to 1 part of fuel can't be reliably spark ignited. On the other end of the scale, mixtures richer than 10 parts of air to 1 part of fuel, no spark ignition. So the early days of mixture preparation began with this sort of gasoline-soaked shirt or a series of wicks, the wick carburetor, to Maybach spray carburetor. The spray carburetor began to bring things under control. And early auto and motorcycle racing took place with constant speed engines. There was no throttle. It just sat there going pack, pack, pack. And I think that, it was one of Mercedes' early mechanics turned car racers, uh, Lautenschlager. What a wonderful name. I've often repeated it to myself when nobody but me was listening. Christian Lautenschlager. He's the one who said to his mechanics at some point, could you guys work up a system whereby we can operate the throttle valve with my foot rather than having to take my hands off the great big steering wheel that was necessary to get leverage over all the horrible bumps and potholes? So this was an advance. The big problem with liquid fuels is getting them to evaporate. And my box spray carburetor worked by having a tube that dipped into the controlled level fuel in the float bowl, and the other end poked up into the airstream rushing toward the cylinder on the intake stroke. And okay, the spray comes out and the droplets are carried along toward the engine, but what breaks the droplets up? Because what is needed is for you to have droplets that are small enough that their total surface area is enough to ensure that they all evaporate by the time they get to the cylinder. Because droplets are 100% fuel and cannot burn. What burns is a mixture of fuel vapor and air. And that's where that's the place to which we're trying to get with fuel spraying into a moving airstream. Well, this brings us to raindrops. And they've always been depicted as being these gracefully shaped things, rounded on the nose with a long tapered tail. Nothing could be farther from the truth.
That's a comet.
Yes, and of course a comet is actually just a big lump of dirty ice. And the tail is stuff that has been pushed off of it by solar radiation. So there's no tail out in space. It develops as the thing gets close to the sun. But anyway, we've got this droplet falling. The droplet tends to be spherical because the surface tension of the liquid is at its minimum energy position when the droplet is spherical. That's the smallest surface area that's possible. It is down to this minimum. Now we let this thing fall through the atmosphere. The droplet formed up in a rain cloud. Now it's falling naturally. Impact with the air as it falls flattens the bottom of the droplet. By impact, the top of the droplet remains rounded. It does not become a long, streamlined tail. And as the collision velocity between the droplet and the moving air, or the moving droplet and the stationary air, as that relative velocity is raised in our experimental situation, not only does it flatten the bottom of the droplet, but it begins to make it concave. And eventually, the surface tension says, oh, I could convert this into a torus, like an inner tube or a donut. And so,
or a torque converter. That's
yes.
what they used to call them. They used to call them the torus, the torque converter. It has that shape.
Torus. That's right.
It's like I think in the red blood cell shape like that.
Yes, it is. It's punched in on both sides. And there's a torus in certain types of nuclear power stations. A safety feature. Anyway, it punches through the center of the droplet. The surface tension pulls the droplet into this torus shape, but the airflow past the droplet is never uniform. Nature abhors uniformity. There's always a problem.
Chaos pendulum.
Yes. So Now what happens is that the torus begins to oscillate and ping, it breaks up into a series of sub-droplets in the form of a crown. And it's quite beautiful. There are high-speed photographs of this. Well, if the droplets still have not accelerated up to the speed of the airflow, the sub-droplets may be flattened, punched in, turned into little donuts, and broken into sub-droplets. And what is this dependent upon? It's dependent upon the velocity of collision between the droplets and the moving air. Well, I got very interested in this at a point, and I
You don't
pulled
say.
out I pulled out my copy of Ludwig Prandtl, which is an elementary text in fluid dynamics. And in there is some arithmetic that allows you to relate the speed of collision, the surface tension of the fluid in the droplet. And it turns out that when the velocity of collision is about to become sonic, the droplet size that is produced in gasoline is around 10 microns. And this is a happy state because it turns out that in the curve showing how well different sized droplets will burn in a mixture of fuel vapor and air inside the cylinder, there's a sort of break in the curve at 10 microns that essentially says this whatever's left will evaporate by the time it gets into the cylinder. Mind you, the intake port of the engine is hot, and passing through the intake valve, which is even hotter, one set of experiments showed a temperature rise of 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it gets into the hot combustion chamber. It's surrounded by hot metal. So what we're going to try to do in order to make sure that no fuel stays in the droplet form all the way through the combustion process and goes out the exhaust pipe as unburned hydrocarbons for the EPA to detect and disapprove. So very quickly, the carburetor designers said, what we need is more velocity, because if we could break up these droplets better, the operation of the vehicle would become more efficient because there wouldn't be any unburned fuel to speak of passing through. So they build a Venturi, a place where the air passage narrows and then smoothly resumes its previous diameter. This accelerates the air and without imposing too much loss, because what is lost on the way into the Venturi is recovered on the way out. So this improved fuel vaporization, and it may even have allowed them to use heavier molecular weight fuel components, because gasoline is not a pure substance. It's a mixture of hydrocarbons from quite lightweight and quite fast evaporating, volatile, all the way to quite a bit heavier hydrocarbons that are sort of lamp oil-like in their evaporation behavior. So I remember finding a carburetor in a junkyard. It was a single barrel carburetor from the 1940s and 50s. And this had a triple Venturi in it. The fuel delivery tube ended up inside of a little tiny Venturi, which was getting its air from the high velocity area of a secondary Venturi, which in turn was getting its intake air from the high speed primary Venturi. So you had three stages of accelerating the airflow in hope of getting such a high velocity that the droplets would all be beaten into submission and non-existence.
Well, that would be a product of the fuel of the time as well, correct?
Yes, yes, it certainly would be. And this is why wintertime fuel is more volatile than summertime fuel. Because
or old gas.
Yes, or old gas is another terrible problem. So
all the light stuff goes away, and then it's like put a lit match out, and you don't do that at home. But
we don't talk about this. Yeah. Honda were working on their trying to automate mixture control, and they looked at the situation of adding fuel to an airstream, and they said, aha, there are 3 modes of fuel transport here. One mode is fuel that evaporates into a vapor immediately. These are the tiny droplets. They evaporate very quickly. So that's being carried along with the airstream as part of it. The second part is fuel droplets that have not yet fully evaporated, and they're being carried along in the airstream too. And the third mode of transport was wall wash, fuel that has attached itself to the inside walls of the intake pipe and is just sort of sliding along there, carried by collisions with fast-moving gas molecules, air molecules. So those 3 modes constantly vary depending upon what type of duty the engine is doing. So those fellows had a job writing software that would predict, okay, now there are going to be fewer droplets, but more wall wash or
well, let's talk about this. So, carburetors are relying on signal. So you're only getting fuel when the air is asking for it, as the air kind of waltzes through your Venturi and your carburetor. So you're relying on signal, vacuum signal from the engine. And it's something important that I've learned from you over the years also. So we're relying on signal from the engine for our carburetor to out gasoline in a way that's good. And we can make it work pretty darn well. You can take a 4-barrel, automotive carburetor and make the primaries nice and lean at cruise, but the secondaries hose it in there at 12 to 1 or something, and you get all the power you want. So you can get fuel economy, and we can do that now with EFI. Although mostly EFI is set to stoichiometric, which is 14.7, because they want to get as close to complete combustion as possible. And we do that with our fuel injection. So now we're not relying on signal. We can just do whatever we want with fuel. However, we have 10-hole, 12-hole injectors. We're pressurizing the fuel usually to 2 to 3 bar, which is like 43.5 to 58 PSI. So you got all this pressure, and that's like bang, and you're just shooting the stuff out. So you're already atomizing a lot of the fuel, and you're making it small. But then, no matter what, sometimes the fuel drops could come back together. If they're shot in at a velocity that's moving the same speed as the air, you may not get
no relative velocity, no droplet breakup.
You wouldn't get droplet breakup. Then if you're behind, if your throttle valve's way over here and you're in this chamber heading to the intake valve, the relative pressure of that chamber will change. You would have a high vacuum condition when the throttle is relatively close. So at cruise, you're injecting into essentially more of a vacuum, which is encouraging the fuel that is available, that's being shot in there, to break apart more.
Yep.
And on a carburetor, you would notice this on a cold carbureted engine that's somewhere in the warm-up phase where it's running pretty good, and then you crack the throttle and it goes bah, and just bogs out. You've changed the pressure in the intake system. You've made it atmospheric. And so everything that was like, oh, this vacuum is making me want to expand and break apart. And you open the throttle, the air pressure goes, ha. And then you get big droplets back in and the thing bogs out.
Not only that, but when you suddenly open the throttle, the air, being extremely light, responds promptly.
By not moving much.
But the fuel, which weighs 600 times more per cubic inch, its density is 600 times that of the air, kind of goes, do we want to do this? Yeah, so this relates, on, guys.
Yeah, this relates back. Yeah, go ahead.
The fuel waits behind.
Yeah.
And the air rushes in. What is the result? Lean mixture, stumble.
So this is related to the Honda folks trying to, meet emissions like by digitizing and self-controlling mixture, figuring out all the different pressures, everything that's going on with the droplets sticking to the wall or not sticking to the wall. And then, of course, which way do you aim your fuel injectors? It's turned out to be very important. How far away you put your fuel injector on a super bike, like back in, I loved the big shower head days when the Ducati twins were running at high RPM, your Superbike twins, 916, 996, 998. They had an injector down by the valve, and then they had a secondary injector, the shower head, which was inches above the intake horn. And when you really were hitting your IRPM, that's when they were hosing it out the top to give it time
To
to
evaporate.
atomize, to
Yeah.
evaporate before it gets to the chamber.
Well, this is a real problem that faces every engine is cold start. And cold start is troublesome because if you look at all the components that go into, say, pump gasoline, some are volatile, some are much less volatile over a range. And why don't they make it all one molecular weight? Because refining everything to a single molecular weight would be a lot of botheration, and they would pass on the the savings to the customer. And so this is a way to use a boiling range. Gasoline was originally defined as whatever it is that boils out of petroleum between these two temperatures. And that
Just
that was a problem. Now, if we accept the fact that there is a difference in boiling temperature from the most to the least volatile in pump gasoline, when we try to cold start the engine, the only stuff that evaporates is the most volatile, which is referred to as the front end of that gasoline.
like it.
But it's like 10 or 15% of the total. So you have a drastically lean mixture if you try to start. The engine, the starter cranks the engine, wheel, it never fires because it's so lean. All these droplets that are unevaporated are going through, and the little boy, that's me, at the back is smelling this wonderful, rich gasoline smell pouring out the tailpipe. And so a crude solution is adopted. What people said was, if the front end of the gasoline is only 10% of the total, then let's enrich 10 times the normal mixture so that the quantity that does evaporate, the 10% or maybe up to 15% of the front end, the volatile stuff, forms an ignitable mixture and the engine starts. Now, in my 1960 Falcon, you pulled the choke out all the way on a cold day, cranked the engine, it started. As soon as the engine began to warm up and the intake pipe had a little temperature in it, it evaporated more and more and more fuel, and the engine began to be so rich. So you push the choke in until it runs nicely. And so it would go. If you had to drive off in that condition, it would be with a lot of fits and starts. But gradually, as you went down the road, you would push in the choke until finally you have a fully warmed up engine and you no longer need enrichment. Now,
Or
this
fast,
starting, yes,
or fast idle, right? We're
yes.
cracking the throttle to get that velocity going.
Well, and you're with the choke. There's a little cam that opens the throttle somewhat, and that was 1960. So, what a bother! The first fuel injected motorcycles had a manual choke system to enrich them because they hadn't yet worked out how to automate that part of the starting. And that was a bother, but they were at work on the problem. And today, you turn the key or wave your magic wand, the engine starts no matter what the temperature. It warms up without hiccups. And if you have to leave early, you can drive away. And
No,
it is all handled automatically. It's
it's
so wonderful.
it's really good because you could take one of these bikes back here. We have like a Tenere 700. You could take that Yamaha Tenere 700 with the parallel twin. I could push it outside, get on it, start the motorcycle, push the button, start the motorcycle. It's 70-degree day, whatever, and I could throw the clutch and do a wheelie with zero. Like the thing would just run ice cold.
Yep.
And it would run without hiccup. It's remarkable. You start your Yamaha XS 650 with its little enrichener circuits. You lift the plunger, and
Oh,
fuel
the
just
plungers, yes.
you lift the plunger and the fuel just goes pouring in. So you push that lever down, and you start it up, and you almost got to turn it off right away because it's got so much fuel. There's no in between on that bike. It's just like click, it's open, or click,
The
it's
thing
closed.
is on or off, yes.
There's no multiple like, oh, we're just going to bleed a little bit in there. It just does the whole thing. You get it going, and it's sloppy enough that it keeps running.
In
It's a
the
little
early
rich.
days, of fuel injection, droplet size thrown by fuel injectors was larger than that from carburetors. A carburetor running on low throttle is getting all of its fuel from those three little holes near the edge of the throttle butterfly. And when that butterfly is open, just a few thousandths, the velocity through there is very high. So it's making an excellent mixture. But the first fuel injectors were a single orifice with a pintle, a movable stopper.
I got rid of the ones on my '89 Ford F-250 early Ford fuel injection. It's a Bosch system, single pintle, and there's a plug and play where you can get a 6-hole or a 10-hole, whatever it is. I forget, but I upgraded, and it does run better.
In the early days of some of these single hole injection bikes, the owners who were trying very hard, this is break in, I better check the oil. And the more they checked the oil, the more it began to look like it wasn't using any oil. In fact, the oil level was going up. How could that happen? Here's how it happened. The coarse droplets thrown out by those pintle injectors, some of them were big enough to just keep plowing through the air in the cylinder till they hit the cylinder wall, where they splashed into a film on the cylinder wall. And piston, the oil scraper ring on a piston is a down passing ring. It glides up over a film of oil and it scrapes it down. So, because if it were not down passing, it would have to be at least partially up passing, which would mean oil going into the combustion chamber, making a smoky exhaust, embarrassing the owner, and summoning the EPA. So, those early bikes, a few of them, their oil level went up because of fuel dilution. So, that was
Well,
a
it
good reason.
happens
Yeah.
when your float valves stick too.
Yeah.
That Yamaha XS 650, when I pulled it out of the barn to do the Ranman Park video for Motorcyclist, the oil in that thing was like water. It was so thin. And you just had to take a whiff to understand why. And it was float
Yes.
valves were sticking. If you left the fuel on, it was just like slowly dripping in, working its way easily past the rings and settling into the oil mixture, which, scrubbed out the interior a little bit. It's good.
Well, I believe I've told before about my friend who was so enthusiastic about drag racing, and in particular, he loved starting on the rollers. And he was pretty sure that a lot of that fussy detail was just for nerds. So Did he bother to disconnect his fuel lines after he put his bike on the trailer to go home from the drag races? Not always. So this one day he takes his bike off the trailer and he gasses up and he goes over to the rollers, the sacred ritual. Mind you, this was a 500 triple. This is a bike that you could start on the stand by pulling the back tire through. That's how we started our race bike, always, because it was so convenient. But he puts the thing on the rollers and there's a bump. And he had a rod that went like this. It est the rod, turned it into a lovely curvature.
Hydraulic.
Yep, he hydraulic the rod. And that's a sidebar right there, just because it occurred to me. But that's one of the things that can happen if you, through any means, permit fuel to enter the crankcase or the cylinders. So it's one of the things, if you've seen those those films of aircraft crewmen pulling the propeller blades through, rotating the engine, they're making sure that no cylinder is going to hydraulic when the starter turns it. Because those human hands on those giant propeller blades are going to, oh, what's that resistance?
No, it's a beautiful part of this ritual of starting a radial when you go to air shows, even today. When they go to fire up Fifi or Doc, the B-29,
pulling it through.
There's a string of people on these great paddles, like 19-foot propeller blades, and they trade because it's so much work. One guy gets it there, and then the next person comes along and grabs and they rotate it through. And there's a certain number of times, like
so many blades.
The Jacobs, the Jacobs for the 195, they want you to pull it through a certain number of times.
Yep.
Before you hit the key.
Yep. Switch on the magnetos.
Yeah, make sure it's off if you're doing that by hand. How about heated intake manifolds? That's something that I've observed where, on the automotive side in particular, where a good running vehicle with nice qualities is suddenly a bad running vehicle when you put the aftermarket intake manifold that no longer has any heating in it.
Yes.
And suddenly you're running, or your especially your small throttle openings don't work as nicely.
The intake manifold on a multi-cylinder engine is a cathedral of wall wash. The whole inside of it is wet with fuel. And that fuel is sliding along toward the cylinders, and it will get there. And it will fill the cylinders up with all these horrible droplets, and it won't run well. So they put little passages into the intake manifold and ran hot exhaust gas through them, so the manifold evaporated the wall wash. No more wall wash. Excellent. Very good. So I was talking one day on the phone to people from Phillips Petroleum in Oklahoma. They wanted the magazine. They said, we would love to cooperate with you in doing an article on race gas. And of course, my editor at that time, David Edwards, said what he always said when he didn't like a topic: how would we illustrate it? Yes. These fellows had a race fuel that they were selling in Europe to people running two-strokes. So this would be in the 80s, 90s. And this fuel was not very volatile. So they said it works best in an engine with very tight squish. Squish, as we have no doubt bored you before in explaining, is that part of the piston, or those parts of the piston, which are intentionally made to come very close to the cylinder head material in a uniform way. As the piston rises, yes, you see the four squish areas. As
So
the
it's this
piston
band
rises,
here, this here, this here, this here, and then the cylinder head correspondingly is it's getting closest on those bands, and then this more open area, it squishes out of there, and you get turbulence and a concentration around where we're lighting the match or spark.
yep, where the piston is approaching the cylinder head, and that mixture that is between these flat surfaces as the piston reaches top dead center is squirted radially inward. This not only adds some turbulence, the flame has already started, so it can't hurt, but it also gives a last opportunity for fuel evaporation. And this particular Phillips race gas, they were going for high octane number, that is resistance to detonation. And normally when you do that, you use a lot of heavy stuff that's not very volatile. Things like the 4 good structures of octane, which is an 8 carbon hydrocarbon, and tryptane. So this stuff needed help in evaporation. Similarly, in the case of, where am I here? Frequently, people are tempted to go for the big numbers. And so the dyno shop in town that gives the highest horsepower is quite popular because people don't want information, they want excitement in many cases. It's important to try to resist this, but it must be admitted that we are sort of swept along by, look at this, a wonderful big number. So they're buying their race gas, and it says turbo gas, 124 octane. Oh, I got to have that. But when you talk to the guy on the phone from the fuel blender, he says that is just for turbocharged engines because that's the way we made it. When a mixture of fuel droplets and air passes through the cold side of a turbocharger, it is one, whacked and beaten to pieces by entering the whirling impeller, and two, compression is a heating process. So heat is added to the mixture, which helps evaporation even more. This allowed the fuel blender then to say, we can dump in more of that super high octane number, but not very fast evaporating stuff. But if you then put that in your superbike, which is not turbocharged, you won't get full evaporation, and you will get things like loss of RPM off the top because there's not a lot of time for fuel evaporation when your 1000cc engine is turning 14.7. And the result is, also throttle response is not so hot. So instead, the fuel blender says, here is a more volatile fuel, which has a lower octane number than turbo gas. But if you run turbo gas, your engine will knock, not because of the fuel doesn't have a high octane number, but because the mixture is lean, because the engine can't evaporate all of that heavy stuff in the fuel. So that's one of the things that you'll find if you get a little booklet or look at a website for race gases, they will advise you to use turbo gas in turbo engines. At one point, Formula One was told the volume of fuel that you may use is limited, so many gallons, so many liters. So they got out their handbook of chemistry and physics, and they leafed through, the pages are so thin, and they found that toluene is quite dense. which means that you would get more calories in per cubic foot. So they wanted to switch to a toluene-based fuel, but toluene is lousy at evaporating. So what did they do? They ran the fuel through a preheater before they routed it to the injectors. And there have also been snowmobiles that had float bowls that were heated by engine coolant, because snowmobiles are run in very cold weather.
Yes, they are. The heated grips on snowmobiles are a miracle. They're like, it's like holding a curling iron. I mean, they are so hot. Yeah, injection on snowmobiles was a great thing.
Well, carburetor size was a classic problem. Now, those of you who have taken any interest in or studied Vincent motorcycles will find that they were equipped with carburetors that were not much more than an inch in diameter. And you think, 500cc cylinders with a dinky little carburetor like that? But when people started putting bigger and bigger carburetors on engines, they found that they became sensitive to atmospheric changes. And people who knew a little bit about this could get very excited over the idea that these engines are so finely tuned that if the sun goes behind a cloud, they don't run right. Isn't that marvelous? Not to the person that's trying to make them run right. It's a pain. So when you go to bigger carburetors, if you were living in that classic era, you face the problem of, oh, now I've reduced the air velocity. So now I've increased the average droplet size. So now I may have a lean mixture, and I'm going to have to compensate by jetting up, lifting the needle.
2 millimeters makes a big difference. The 928 versus the 930 Amel on a Norton Commando. I did that, and I was like, I got to get the 930s, and I think it was 930s. There was a 2 millimeter difference, which in a percentage basis is actually not insignificant on a circle. So
because it's a squared relationship, yeah.
And so it, I might have picked up something on top, but I lost something on the bottom.
Yeah. So motorcycle carburetors, of course, never had multiple Venturis in them to jack up the air velocity so that it could break up fuel to very fine sizes. A motorcycle, after all, is 2 wheels, an engine, and a place to sit. And when you start messing with that and making it more complicated, you run into troubles. So simple carburetors for a simple machine. At one point, we had access to aviation gasoline and decided to run our 2-strokes on that stuff. Lots of people have had the experience of running on avgas through the summer. Everything is fine. But when the leaves start to fall, suddenly you're having to put brass in your carburetor that you've never used before. Why? Well, the temperature of the air is down. What that means in a carbureted system is bigger fuel droplets, because you aren't getting that extra boost from the warmth of conditions to evaporate more fuel. So you're going to end up with a situation that is harder to warm up, that is has less good throttle response, and you may even lose revolutions on top. This is another type of story that is frequently told, that people arrive at Daytona with their hot rocket ship bike and their SoCal race gas. Nothing greater can be conceived, and it won't top end. And the old timer on the team says, I'll fix this, just a minute. And he drives out through the old Daytona tunnel, And there on the right was the 76 station. He fills a 5-gallon can with pumped regular and brings it in and mixes in a bunch of regular. Presto, the top end comes back. Because the regular gas, they're not trying hard for octane number, so they've got good volatility.
They're just trying hard enough. That's it.
Yep,
Just enough.
that's right. Nobody wants to sell the company, give the company away.
Well, it's a real art mixing your race gas and your pump gas for your vehicles that you drive around on a regular basis that are not very tolerant of lower octane fuels. My Velocette, for example, ching, boy, factory spec, 38 degrees of spark lead, and if you run 91 California 91 in there, you can get some pinking, particularly on the transition part. If you go full, if you give it lots of throttle, it tends to knock less. But if you're on the slide cutaway that works most of the time, it's a little bit lean and it tends to knock.
That's why the old test for mixture strength on top was to roll off. If you pick up revs, just roll off a little. If it picks up revs, you know that it's rich.
So we should talk about slide carburetors. So we're everything's EFI now, pretty much. I mean, there's the XR650 and stuff, and a few vestiges of carburation, but most of the time we're just EFIing everything because it's easy to control. Everything has sensors all over it anyway. If it's been designed in the last 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, we're doing pretty good. But there are plenty of carburetors out there, and there was that time where you had slide carburetors, like your RD350 had a 28 millimeter Makuni pair of those. Little slide moves up and down, and it's connected to your cable. But then we got CV carburetors as an SU on British cars, and then all the Makunis and Kians with rubber diaphragms and air running under the piston, creating a vacuum within the piston and that rubber diaphragm with the chamber above, lifting the slide, which had a needle connected to it. Why did we change, Kevin? What happened there?
Well, one of the things that can embarrass people is that if you were riding a hot Bonneville in 1966 and you snap the throttle and it was a little disappointing, you would have qualms about, my buddies all told me to get the single carburetor bike because it runs better, but I wanted the hottest of the hot. So this is a compromise that has to be addressed. So it's a fortunate thing that all the old carburetor guys wrote their memoirs and retired, and they're no longer available to help us with carbureted bikes. So we have to learn what they knew on our own. And it requires persistence. One of my favorite subjects, I was looking into fuel evaporation, going from one website to another, reading technical papers, some of which are so rich in impenetrable equations that I just walk on by. But this one was a paper by some Japanese researchers who were investigating diesel combustion. And in order to assure reproducible results, instead of buying diesel fuel for this experiment, they made an artificial fuel consisting of 1/3 of the lightest, fastest evaporating end of the diesel boiling range, 1/3 the high temperature boiling range, and one right in the middle. And this droplet was examined in great detail and high magnification as it was warmed up. And when they warmed the droplet to the temperature at which the most volatile of the three fractions began to evaporate, they saw a wonderful thing: droplet quakes. The stuff was inside the droplet and it's trying to evaporate, and it blows the droplet up. And when the temperature rose to the boiling point of the middle fraction, the process was repeated. The droplet began to look like two dogs fighting in a sack. The researchers, of course, their calling is too dignified to use that type of language, but that's what they were saying. And so I think to myself that the front end of fuel is there for a multiplicity of reasons, not just there for cold starting. It's there to help explode those droplets.
Encouragement.
Yeah, because as the droplets whiz into the engine, I mentioned the 75 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature just passing through the intake valve and into the combustion space. This helps to evaporate the droplets. Now, the late Jim Chikala, who ran a dyno shop near Buffalo, did a lot of business for years with snowmobile racers, which meant low intake temperature. But then he got going with dirt track people. And he decided to get interested in fuel, the pressure that exists above fuel in a sealed container. And he found that by the time the fuel got to the user, much of the front end of that fuel had evaporated. When it's decanted from a big storage tank into a truck, for example, that's one stage, and there's a lot of disturbance, there's a lot of splashing, and there's a lot of air and fuel interfacing. And finally, some guy in the back of a big shop is filling the 5-gallon tins that you're going to buy and take to the races. So what old Jim, who's unfortunately no longer with us, what he discovered was that by the time it gets to the user, much of the front end of the fuel is gone. And so with that have gone some revs off the top, some in the middle. So he decided, I'm going to add isopentane to this fuel and see if I can get that back. And he found that he could. So there's wonderful complexity here.
Well, I just went down to isopentane depot and picked some up, or
yeah, he found. I asked him. I was talking to him on the phone. I said, "Well, what did you do?" He said, "I ordered it from Chemical Supply. They're happy to do business. They send it right to me."
Wow. I think I mentioned to you I tried to get some tetraethyl lead once.
Oh, that's a different.
It was the 80s, and I was running around on vintage equipment, and I wanted to get some lead in my gas, get some detonation resistance, and I don't know, theoretically protect my valve seats, which turned out they were already hardened anyways. But so I had a friend working at the chemical company, and I'm like, hey, what do you think, Robert? Can you get me a drum of that stuff? I could just add it to my own fuel. And he's like, I don't know. Let me look into that.
Yeah.
And he came back and he says, well, A, you don't want it because it's one of the most toxic things that we've ever isolated. And also B, you can't have it because the drums that we have that have it in it are on scales because it's so tightly regulated. Every ounce that goes out of that drum is measured. And they know where it goes. There's no like spilling some off for your buddy to put into his fuel at home.
The way I remember it is you have to have a license to possess it. You have to have a license to pour it out of one container and into another. And there's a third license that's required, but I don't remember what that was. But yes, tetraethyl lead is a combination of 4 ethyl groups connected to a lead atom. Lead, a heavy metal. The most poisonous substance that supposedly exists is dimethyl mercury, and it was used as a standard for extreme toxicity, but then they decided that it was too dangerous to use, and they had to use something else. But those ethyl groups, ethyl alcohol is familiar to all of us, and the body sees those ethyl groups coming and, yeah, you guys are okay, come on in. But they've got that lead molecule with them, and it does bad things to us. So, for so many reasons, they decided to discontinue lead in fuel, and you could get leaded race gas. And for a time, you could get leaded fuel for aviation purposes. When I bought some 115, 145 in late in 1973, they were calling it helicopter gas because helicopters were the only engines, their engines were the only ones that could not be derated to run on blue or green gas. 115, 145 was purple gas. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah, we're down to low lead 100 in aviation, and then they are phasing the lead out of some aviation fuels. They're still working on that.
Yeah.
And you can get your, you can call your Sunoco and you can get your 110 octane leaded if you need it. Certainly the Jaguars like it. And the Velocette does like it too. The guys on the Velocette rally haven't been for a number of years because it conflicts with our kind of family vacation that we have every year. And I can't make the Velocette rally, but the last time that I went, I took a big jug of leaded 110, and by the third day of the rally, someone noticed that my fishtail on my bike, the Velocettes have a fishtail exhaust, which they're famous for. The fishtail had a gray haze out of the round perforations at the back.
Yes, indeed.
And I was called out for using cheater gas because it's a very big deal to finishing the Velocette rally without problems is a big deal. Getting to the end, and you don't want to win the Croc Award, which is when you don't make it or you have the most failures. So.
It used to be that when you went from Grand Prix to Grand Prix in European racing, in the early days, you had to use the local official gasoline. And it could be anything. So Kel Carruthers, among others, and long tradition before him, carried a small drum of toluene. Toluene is not too fast evaporating, but has a really good octane number. Back in the early days of tetraethyl lead, the British decided not to approve it because it was so poisonous. So for a long time, in the U.S., they're using leaded fuel from, 1923 or so. And in Britain, in order to boost the octane of casing head gasoline, which is, as I said, just whatever boils out of petroleum between two temperatures, could be anything, a mixture of 200 different possibilities. They could boost their octane with a bit of toluene and not detonate. As you know, in those days, you were always looking for detonation in the form of something that resembled a tiny speck of cigarette ash on the spark plug electrodes. That used to be aluminum. And this is why modern engines have detonation sensors and spark retard systems to protect them from the occasional nasty gasoline. So the bottom line to all of this talk that we've made today is that mixture preparation has been fully automated in both production and racing, modern stuff. And it's a wonderful thing because there were so many problems and such subtlety in solving them that it's nice to just put that aside. We know we don't die of smallpox anymore. We dealt with that. Mixture preparation has been dealt with.
It's pretty great.
Anyone who's ever rebuilt a car carburetor, the little kit comes in a little packet, and there's O-rings and little balls and a folded up document in very tiny print. And the worst part is trying to get the choke system to work by bending various levers to match the printed ideal on the instructions.
I had an 86 Toyota pickup. I bought it with 300,000 miles and it ran okay, but the guy I bought it from said to me, you know, I'll be honest with you, man, I've done nothing but abuse this thing. I just use it to commute and whatever. And so I bought it anyway because it was a Toyota, had a 22R, and it was just Toyota's famous super ultra durable inline 4-cylinder they used in a lot of different things. And I'm a carburetor guy, so I was going to rebuild that carburetor. And I ordered the kit, and I went to my auto parts store, and I got the kit, and lo and behold, it was a box about this big, and it had hundreds of parts in it. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but it had a lot of parts, and it had little tiny O-rings that might go on the end of this pencil. It was just overwhelming. And I took it to the small guy, and he's like, he says, yeah, this thing won't pass. Take it to Bob over at RPM Carburetor. And I don't know if Bob's still doing it. I think he is, but Bob did that carburetor for me. But by the time, 89 came around, the Ford F-250, they figured out single pintle fuel injectors and stuff. And it works okay, but they didn't have knock sensors. And so you can buy a Bosch knock sensor that just bolts to the outside of the engine, and but you have to have some means of connecting that to your ignition system to retard the timing so they can get rid of the detonation. The way they dealt with it on the Ford F-250 was the maximum timing, full advance, all in, is 28 degrees, I believe, at 3,400 RPM. And at 3,000, it's 26 degrees. That's not a lot of lead. And they're doing that.
That's not a lot of lead. No, indeed.
And they're doing that because they're trying to make it run on 87 and have absolute margin for detonation so that you don't get it. Whereas
and
now,
what you pay for late timing is peak pressure is developed later in the cycle. It is less effective in producing power. And how do you respond? By opening the throttle more. So it's not very good for gas mileage.
Oh, it's really doggy. And so you want to, all of that is automated now. Now you have a knock sensor. And so that makes the fellow with the 89 F-250 want to reprogram it. Like, can I get a box and reprogram all this stuff? Because then I can get the timing to do whatever I want to do. But now, I can get on this T7 and it's going to know exactly where it should go. It's going to give you all the timing that you have available, and let's boogie. It's nice.
The poor engine is thirsting for 36 BTDC.
Oh, it wants it.
Somewhere
Yeah,
in that.
It wants 36 at probably 36 at 3,500 RPM is probably what it wants. Yeah.
Yeah.
And through 2,000, you probably want 25 degrees at 2,000 is what you probably want. I've recurved many a thing. I wish I could do a more accurate job recurving the Velocette, but it's an automatic timing device. It has weights and springs. The Yamaha XS650, weights and springs. It's got a long rod that goes through the center of the camshaft, and one side the points is on, and the other side is your weights and springs. If you don't lubricate that, it gets really sticky. I've got a video. I'll show it to you sometime. It gets really sticky, and then the springs get sacked out. And so then you get full timing at, it's idling at, 1,000 RPM, and then you crack the throttle and at 1,400, full advance. Or the idle is unstable because the spark doesn't go back to base timing. It's like I'm kind of stuck up at here at 18 degrees. So the bike's like, but if you drag the engine down, sometimes the weights will go. Like if you put it against the clutch, the weights will then retract, and then but you rev it and it goes da 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 da. And it could be that one of your carbs is lean, and you have one of your screws in the wrong spot, and that will make your idle hang. And there's many, many problems that we don't have anymore. And some of us have a penchant for suffering, and we still do it anyways.
Yes. Well, we put a German-made Krober ignition on our 750 triple Kawasaki, and those big cylinders are harder to start than the little 167 cc's on the 500 triple. So I'm pushing it like it's a 500, and it's kind of going, and it started. It didn't seem to run very well, and he got it in neutral, and he's looking at it. Finally, he sort of shrugs, pulls a clutch, puts it in gear, drives away backwards. This ignition would run backwards, not well, but it would result in some power. So that was all in a day's work. You're doing this, and this comical thing happens, but you're trying to make practice. So like Scarlett O'Hara, I'll think about that tomorrow, and you file it away and think about it later. So that was grand. Carburetors were a priesthood. If you could make things work well on carburetors, you were widely admired. I hoped to become one of those wizards, and I had moved up some levels so that I could see what they were doing. But for example, at Assen in 1981, I was talking with Irv Kanemoto, who became a master, and he put up his hand because one of the Yamahas had started. And then he said, after a couple of seconds, he said, I think they've changed the power valve program. Oh. Engine sounds are information dense if you know that language.
Yeah.
So the automated systems know that language.
Yeah, you can hear timing too. You can hear your late timing or your early timings. You can feel it in the way something moves through the mid-range.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of.
And think of the dreadful error that the magneto ignition that I first worked with on a 250 twin. Timing was 2 millimeters before top dead center from here to there, which meant it was drastically too little at 6,000 RPM and vastly too much at 10,500. So the engine was equally unhappy at almost all times. It's like the clock that is right twice a day. As the engine accelerates, there's one point at which the timing is correct, and at all other RPM, the timing is wrong. And that's why we have mapped ignitions. They find out the optimum timing for every RPM and throttle position, and it's all canned into a vast memory in your ECU.
No, it's great. And it's being able to go to something like a tri-spark ignition on your Norton Commando or your Vintage Triumph is spectacular because...
Is that like burst mode on an automatic rifle? It gives you a couple quick ones?
It does everything for you. It does.
Yeah.
You have a full curve. The Ignitec ignition, it's a Czech company.
Mm-hmm.
Ignitec is a programmable ignition box that you can use, like Dan May uses it on he's the executive director for ARMA, and he races a BMW flat twin, the R75, which I raced last year. And I found out he had an Ignitec ignition, made an reluctor, a pickup for it, so he could program his curve and have a full curve rather than, I'm going to run it at 36 And like early electronic ignitions were stepped. You had an idle mode, and then you had a full advance mode, and that's why you would do it on a Ducati. In 1995, they still had essentially a two mode. There was a supposed curve, but it was a very vertical line between whatever the idle was, 10 and 36 or whatever the max was. I don't remember the numbers, but it was essentially a straight line, and the Ignitec puts a programmable curve in, so therefore you can pick. You can listen for your detonation. You can tread the line, but they'll give you a curve right out of the box. They've done this, and they'll give you something that's perfectly safe for pump gas. And you plug in a few wires. It's terminated to go on your wiring harness, and you put it in, and then you just have it. And you can
plug and play.
Yeah, plug and play, and it's got a serial port. Like, what the hell is that? It has a serial port that you plug into. I have one extremely old laptop computer that's running, MS-DOS, because everything else we do is Mac these days. But none of the tuning softwares are typically available for Mac. So you just use your old serial port, you plug it in, and I have that laptop, and I see my chart, and I see my ignition timings, and I go, I'm going to put a little more in mid-range and see how it goes. It's wonderful.
Yep.
Biggest change from, I still use a magneto on the Velo, like a BTH, and I bought new springs for it, and the weights and the pivots are in pretty good condition, and it's fine.
My erstwhile business partner from years ago had a sound effect that he made for a Triumph with a stuck centrifugal advance. He said, you start the engine, it goes ta-tum, tum, tum, ta-tum, tum, tum, tum. Then you could take that little chrome cover off with the two screws and see the awful truth.
Well, and reminding me that we had a viewer of the podcast comment the other day that we need a compilation of Kevin Cameron's sounds. And he's absolutely right. We do.
We've all made engine sounds and all kinds of sounds as children, and I never saw any reason to stop. So,
it's the music of life.
Yes.
Bah.
Well,
we all know what just happened. Bah. Oh, okay. Ah. We know what that is.
Yes.
Some of us. But that's the difference between a slide carburetor and a CV carburetor. A slide carburetor, you're connected, cables connected to the slide, and if you're at 1500
RPM, your bad idea will be expressed perfectly.
Yeah, you get it.
Yeah. The CV device is the calming hand of superior knowledge.
It's the damper, yes,
stored in the carburetor. Yes, so you go like this, and the CV thing goes.
Just gives you enough.
Gives you a nice smooth ramp up.
Yeah, you throw your Norton Commando on the dyno, and you want to see what she's got, which I did. And I was chastised on the Norton forums because I published my unedited power curve. It was the best run, but I had snapped the throttle too hard, like at 1500, and there was nothing there. So I went back and I rolled it again, and it looked like a huge dip on the dyno graph because the engine was not making power for this short period while I recovered. And then I picked it back up and I fed it in, and we got a nice run out of it. You can't give it everything at 1500. There's no slide carburetor that is going to be able to deliver what you need when you ask that unanswerable question. Yep. Everything without velocity. It's just not going to happen. There's no signal, no velocity. Whereas with a CV carburetor, you're turning a butterfly, and so you go everything, and the air just is going like whatever, and it's running at its velocity under that slide with the holes in it, and it's creating a vacuum in the slide, in the sealed chamber with the rubber diaphragm. And so it is only going to move as much as the air tells it to. You can be as insane as you want, and it will run nicely. Although my friend Ed Milich of duckpower.com, he's a Ducati guy and a Guzzi guy and a pinball guy. But he says, what do you call them? Slovenly CV carburetors. Because I have the CV carburetors on my 95. It's a very stock motorcycle aside from the ignition. And he calls them, he's a flat slide guy because there's the key in kits where you can either have them racked or individual carburetors on the cylinders, and slovenly CV carburetors. They are not as peppy sometimes as your flat slide. It's fine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not everything's a race.
It's
Almost
true.
all the time, but not all the time. Well, thanks for listening, folks. Mixture formation. Hope you liked it. Share it with your other 1.5 friends who might also like it. We appreciate you taking the ride with us, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.